Rebellion! This week we have Korach comes together with 250 men and mounts a formidable rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, we all love a good rebel, and we're worried about crush those rebel scum. And what is going on with Korach? Why was he rebelling against Moshe? And perhaps a deeper reading into his rebellion can actually bring out some redeeming factor in Korach, and perhaps something within his rebellion that not only is it okay to emulate, but a necessity and an essential part in fulfilling our destiny. So let's look at what Korach said to Moshe Rabbeinu. Vayikal al Moshe v'yal Aaron. Korach and the 250 men came up against Moshe and Aaron. Vayomer aleichem, they said to them, Rav lochem, you're taking too much for yourselves. Ki kol ha'eda kulam kedoshim, because the whole congregation were all holy. Uv'seichem havaya, and Hashem is in each and every one of us. Umadua tisnasu al kahal Hashem. So why do you raise yourself up higher than the congregation? Seems like a very good claim, a very good reason to rebel. We are all holy. As a matter of fact, this rebellion could have come, right when Moshe took us out of Egypt, or when we got the Torah and Moshe was leading us. Why did it happen right now? After the incident that we spoke about last week with the spies and coming back with a negative report? Well, a deeper understanding of where we're holding and what the response to the spies' mistake was will help us understand what Korach was essentially saying, how his rebellion was rooted in a very deep and powerful longing that we not only should not disregard, but can emulate and bring out within our own inner rebel. But we'll also see where he went wrong, and if we want to be successful in our rebellion, we need to bear in mind what happened over here. So, last week we mentioned about how the spies, their desire to go into the land of Eretz Yisrael was because their desire to, not go into Eretz Yisrael, to remain in the desert, was because going into the land meant dealing with material concerns. And like they said, it's an Eretz Chelas Yishvel. We're going to get consumed by materialism. Rather stay in the desert, in the spiritual cloud, in the oasis, and there we'll have the ivory tower of spirituality with Moshe teaching us and soaring to mystical, spiritual heights through meditation and prayer all day and learning the deep secrets of the Torah and consuming the spiritual bread from heaven, the man. And their mistake was, we need to go into the land because God created this physical world not for us to abandon it and to escape, but rather to spiritualize the material world. And just when we learned that essential lesson, that it's not the kavanah, the spiritual intent, and the mystical dimension that's of primary importance, but those are like the wings that make the mitzvot soar, but not the actual mitzvah. You got to actually do the physical deed. If you're missing the physical deed, you have nothing. Korach comes along and he says, hey, why do we need the spiritual insight and leadership of somebody like Moshe Rabbeinu? We just learned from the episode of the spies that we're all holy, that it's the physical action that really matters. And when you pick up your hands and you do a mitzvah, you give charity, you do a physical deed, that is the bottom line. That is the main thing. So why take something that's entirely secondary, which is the spiritual feelings and motivation and kavana behind doing the mitzvah, and give it any credence whatsoever? The main thing is doing the deed, and we can all do the deed equally. We just have to know what it is that's got to be done, and we could read the Torah, we can get to the message, and that's it. We don't need to be spiritually inspired. And so his rebellion was against the very concept that, not that there aren't people who are more spiritually in tune, he recognized there are people who understand better, people who understand less, there are people who are more spiritually tuned in and people who are less. But why take something that's entirely secondary, like how spiritually tuned in you are, if the only thing that really matters is that you're doing the physical deed? It's kind of like the spiritual meditation may bring an aura of divine revelation, but the goal is not divine revelation, but a intimacy with the very divine essence beyond any form of revelation. And when you do a physical deed, we learn from the spot, that's how you get the very essence. So it's the action that really matters. But what happened to Korach and his entire congregation? They were so fixated on the physical deed that God opened up the ground and literally swallowed them alive. They thought, hey, we're all the same. We can all just do the action and we don't need to worry about spirituality whatsoever. But what that ended up leading to was being consumed by the materialism, the very fear that the spies had, which made them want to remain in the desert. They didn't want to get swallowed up by the ground alive. It's a land that consumes its inhabitants, is what then actually happened to Korach, who took it to the other extreme and said, hey, we need to just remain focused on the action. Don't worry about, the deeper meditations and mystical understandings of doing the mitzvah. Just do the physical deed, because that's all that really matters. So we learn from the spies that it's not good enough to just be, some people call it like a Jew at heart. I got a good heart. I feel for God. It doesn't matter that I don't do the mitzvah correctly or I don't do the action. No, the details do matter. And doing it right and to the best of our knowledge and the best of our ability is important. It's the physical action that makes it happen. But we can't go to the other extreme and have our Judaism be something that's monotonous and dry, without emotion, without personal involvement and feeling and devotion attached to it. Because otherwise, the mechanical actions become so draining, and we get so carried away in the rote of just doing the deed that rather than being able to persevere and do that forever, we end up getting swallowed up by the ground alive, where we're still breathing, but that's the only sign. But real life is already, you're already in the ground. And so we learn from Korach's rebellion that it is very important to focus on the actual deed and to recognize that without that, we don't have anything. Yet, we can't make the same mistake and forget about trying to grow a deeper attachment to God through meditative prayer and deepen our understanding of the spiritual dimension of the mitzvot and feel a real special and spiritual bond with God. Because if we leave that whole part out, you say, that's for the mystics, the Kabbalists. I'm a practical person. I follow whatever it is that has to get done. I do it. I follow it to the letter of the law. I do it to the T, but I don't need to really develop my inner soul and inner feelings and devotion and emotion in my Judaism. As long as I'm doing the actions, it's good enough. So we learn from the spies that devotion and spiritual yearning alone is not good enough, but we have to do the physical deed. And then we learn from Korach that doing the deed must be imbued with feeling and spirituality, lest it become entirely mechanical and dry and get swallowed up by the ground. And so, in other words, God's desire is to have a dwelling place down here in this physical world. That can't happen if we are entirely detached and removed from the world. We are sent into the world. A neshama that comes from a high and holy place descends and manifests in a physical body with all of the bodily needs and urges. And it's sent there in order to bring about an elevation to the body and the physical world around it. If we just expire in spiritual ecstasy as the soul yearns to go up, then the entire purpose of creation and the journey of the soul is for naught. But if we get so focused on just the material and forget about the yearning of the soul and the spiritual bond altogether, then we also get trapped in the mud and locked in, and then can no longer actually elevate the material if you're trapped by it. And so God's desire is to have a home in the physical dimension, which means you got to be involved in the physical world, but not that that home should be a place where you're kind of hired as a construction worker. Like, I want you to build this home, and now God can move in. God wants the home to be a place where you welcome God into your life. He wants you to build a home so he could dwell with you. The home is not the bottom line. You are. And a relationship with you is the inner dimension of the desire of God. And so it has to be done in the physical dimension, but this also needs to incorporate the element of feeling and emotion in order for it to be not just a dry, bare bones home, but a home that's filled with light, a home that's the divine presence is felt. And so revelations of godliness, as high as they are not God himself. In order for it to be a dwelling for the very essence of God, it needs to be a physical deed, a physical action. You help somebody out, you go out of your way to do a physical favor for another. But in order for that dwelling, that physical dwelling, to be a place that you can sense this is my relationship with God, and that you can really feel God's presence here in this world, we need to have a guide like Moshe Rabbeinu, who is spiritually attuned and therefore can help us excel in our own spiritual devotion, emotion, and connection to Hashem. And so the rebellion got swallowed up by the ground, and yet the Jewish people are called a stiff-necked nation, constantly rebelling. And this could be read in a negative sense, but it could also be interpreted as something very grand. You see, the Lubavitcher Rebbe came onto the scene of a world where the performance of Torah and mitzvahs became dry and monotonous. And the Rebbe didn't accept to just go with the status quo of the world as it is, but insisted in rebelling against the norm of the exile state of existence. And the Rebbe did not create followers. Followers can rebel, have questions, like Korach said, like Moshe Rabbeinu, who brought the Torah and bring a revolutionary outlook to the world. The Rebbe shows each and every one of us how we can rebel against the monotonous, the dry, the normative, so to speak, way of the world, and introduce a new world, the world where we can see the divine soul shining throughout. And so let's not follow the Rebbe, but let's rebel against the world together with the Rebbe, and together, you and I will rebel against the Golus, against the exile state of existence where godliness is hidden and covered up by the surface layer of nature or whatever you call it. But let's uncover that. We'll rebel against that facade and reveal the world for what it truly is. It's God's garden, and this is a divine palace in which we are the guests, and we can welcome together the coming of Mashiach and bring God into our lives, into our homes, and into the entire world at large.